The scalpel-steady hand that once stopped a Marine's bleeding out on a dust-choked battlefield was now trembling, because the woman lying on his exam table had just whispered a name that belonged only to a grave. Marcus Delgado had heard grown men scream in triage tents in Kandahar and never flinched. But when Corinne Ashford, the ice-cold CEO of Ashford Steel Industries, opened her eyes after he popped her dislocated shoulder back into place and murmured, "Naomi, your hands feel just like Naomi's," the physical therapy room in that quiet Charleston clinic seemed to tilt sideways beneath him. Before we go further into this story, if you believe broken people deserve second chances, and that love can find us again even after loss, hit that like button, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this video with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House so you never miss a story like this one. 3 years earlier, Marcus had been a Navy corpsman, the kind of man who ran toward gunfire instead of away from it, because somewhere behind every wounded soldier was a mother, a father, a child waiting for them to come home. He had saved dozens of lives overseas. He had not been able to save the one life that mattered most to him in the world. Naomi, his wife, had died of a brain aneurysm on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon while folding laundry, 3,000 miles away from him, while he was patching up a stranger's shrapnel wound in a country that would never know her name. He got the call standing in a dust storm. He did not cry. He simply went numb, the way frostbite steals feeling before it steals the limb entirely. He came home to a 6-year-old daughter named Willow who no longer spoke in full sentences, and a house that still smelled like her mother's lavender lotion. Marcus left the Navy not because he stopped loving the uniform, but because Willow needed a father who came home every night, not one who might come home in a flag-draped box. He retrained as a civilian physical therapist, using the same steady hands that had held pressure on bullet wounds to now coax stiff shoulders and broken knees back to life. It paid the bills. It kept Willow in her small yellow bedroom with the nightlight shaped like a moon. But some nights, after she fell asleep clutching her mother's old cardigan, Marcus sat on the back porch and wondered if he was just going through the motions of living, a man performing the shape of a life without any of its warmth. Corinne Ashford, meanwhile, was the kind of woman magazine profiles called formidable. She had inherited her father's failing steel company at 29 and turned it profitable within 4 years through sheer will and sleepless nights. She wore tailored blazers like armor and answered emails at 2 in the morning. She had no time for weakness, in herself or in anyone else, because weakness was what had let her father's company nearly collapse, and weakness was what had let her own marriage crumble 2 years prior when her husband decided a woman who worked 80-hour weeks wasn't worth staying for. She buried herself in spreadsheets and board meetings, and if anyone asked whether she was happy, she would simply raise an eyebrow and ask them to define productivity instead. The accident that brought her to Marcus's clinic was almost laughably small for a woman who'd survived corporate takeovers and hostile board votes. She'd slipped on wet marble stairs leaving a shareholder dinner, wrenching her shoulder so badly the ER doctor said surgery might be necessary if physical therapy didn't work first. Her assistant researched every clinic within 50 miles and settled on the quiet one near the harbor, run by a former military medic with unusually gentle hands and a reputation for fixing what other therapists gave up on. The first time Corinne walked into Marcus's office, she was irritated, impatient, glancing at her phone every 90 seconds as though the world might collapse without her supervision. Marcus, unfazed by her sharp tone, simply asked her to describe the pain on a scale of 1 to 10, the same calm, grounding voice he once used on frightened young soldiers. Something about that steadiness unsettled her, because nobody spoke to Corinne Ashford like she was simply a person and not a title. Over the following weeks, as he worked her shoulder through careful stretches and resistance exercises, she found herself talking more than she intended to, about the pressure of the company, about her father's declining health, about the marriage that had quietly dissolved while she wasn't watching. Marcus listened the way he used to listen to dying men's last requests, fully, without judgment, without rushing to fix what didn't need fixing yet. It was on a rainy Thursday afternoon, during a particularly deep tissue release meant to break up scar tissue near her rotator cuff, that Corinne, drowsy from the muscle relaxants and the warmth of his hands, drifted somewhere between waking and sleep, and the name slipped out before she could stop it. Naomi. Marcus froze completely, his fingers still pressed against her shoulder, his heart pounding so loud he was certain she could hear it. When Corinne blinked back to alertness and saw his stricken face, she apologized immediately, confused, explaining that Naomi was her college roommate, her closest friend in the world, who had died of the exact same condition, a brain aneurysm, just 4 years earlier, and that something about the warmth and steadiness of his hands had pulled her straight back into a memory of Naomi braiding her hair during finals week, calming her down before every exam. Marcus sat down slowly in the chair across from her, and for the first time since he'd come home from war, he told a stranger the truth he'd never spoken aloud to anyone outside his own reflection, that his wife's name had been Naomi too, that she'd died the same way, on the same kind of ordinary afternoon, and that hearing that name spoken by a woman he barely knew had cracked something open in his chest that he'd sealed shut for 3 years. Corinne's carefully composed face dissolved into something raw and human, and instead of the awkward silence he expected, she simply reached over with her good arm and placed her hand over his, and said that maybe some names carry people who aren't ready to be forgotten yet, and that maybe grief finds strange ways of introducing people who need each other. From that day on, something between them shifted from patient and therapist into something neither of them had a name for yet. Corinne began arriving early to her sessions, not because her shoulder required more time, but because she found herself wanting to hear about Willow's day at kindergarten, about the little moon nightlight, about the small triumphant moment when Willow had finally said, "I love you, Daddy," again for the first time in months. Marcus, in turn, found himself staying later after clinic hours, listening to Corinne describe the terrifying vulnerability of running a company that everyone expected her to fail, admiring the quiet fire in her that reminded him so much of the resilience he'd seen in the wounded soldiers he'd once treated, the kind of strength that comes only from people who have already survived losing everything once. One evening, months into her recovery, Corinne showed up at the clinic after hours, not for therapy, but simply to talk, and found Willow there waiting for her father to finish paperwork, swinging her small legs off the edge of a waiting room chair. Willow looked up at Corinne with the unguarded curiosity only children possess and asked if she was Daddy's friend who talked about her mommy's name. Corinne knelt down to the little girl's eye level and told her that her mommy's name had belonged to someone very special in her life too, and that maybe that meant her mommy was still finding ways to take care of people she loved, even from far away. Willow considered this with the serious gravity only a 6-year-old can summon, then reached out and took Corinne's hand, and asked if she wanted to see her moon nightlight sometime. Marcus, watching from the doorway, felt something inside his chest that had been frozen solid since that dust storm in Kandahar finally began, slowly, painfully, to thaw. It would be months before Marcus worked up the courage to ask Corinne to dinner properly, and months more before Willow started calling her Miss Corey instead of Daddy's friend, and even longer before Corinne quietly stepped back from 80-hour work weeks to make room in her life for bedtime stories and Saturday morning pancakes in a small house that still smelled faintly of lavender, though now it smelled of something new too, something like second chances and slow healing and family. Rebuilt from the broken pieces of 2 separate griefs. If this story moved something in you, if you believe that healing can arrive in the most unexpected shape, wearing the most unexpected name, please take a moment to like this video and leave a comment below sharing which part touched your heart the most, because your words truly mean the world to storytellers like us. And before you go, here is a special request, just for you watching right now. Type the word healing in the comments if you believe that even in loss, love always finds its way back home. Marcus Delgado never stopped carrying Naomi in his heart, and neither did Corinne forget the friend who had shaped who she became. But grief, they both learned, does not always close a door forever. Sometimes it simply waits patiently in the quiet, until the right stranger walks in, speaks a name out loud, and gently, unknowingly, hands you back your life.